Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek, just one of many podcasts on Trek FM. If you'd like to help keep Star Trek discussion coming your way each day, consider becoming a network patron through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/trekfm and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/trekfm.
This is DC Fontana. You're listening to Trek FM.
Now for action and adventure. Future's here for us to see. It's 2200 AD.
Their mission to fight injustice, to right that which is wrong, and
to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek. Join us at Trek FM as we harken back to the days of wood panel dens, console televisions, and you know what? I'm just too excited to come up with some third clever thing. Because today, Adam and I have a very special guest in the wood panel den, Bob Kline. Bob may not be as well known to you as Dorothy Fontana, Lou Scheimer, or Walter Koenig, but he was an integral part of the world of the animated series. He was responsible for creating over 3/4 of all the ships, creatures, aliens, and environments for the show. Bob's a 36-year veteran of the animation business. From 1973 to 2009, he worked at a variety of animation houses like Filmation, Ruby Spears, Warner Brothers, and Disney. His job titles during those years included layout artist, storyboard artist, background painter, and character designer. He's even produced and directed a few shows. He's worked on Batman, Thundarr the Barbarian, He-Man, G.I. Joe, Muppet Babies, pretty much anything in the Disney afternoon, Animaniacs. Basically, if you've watched any cartoon on television, you've probably seen his work. And yes, art is a visual medium, and this is an audio podcast, so we're going to be sure to tweet and post some of the images that we've been talking about. There is a treasure trove of information to explore, so let's jump right into this first part of our two-part discussion. Bob Kline, welcome to the Wood Panel Den. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's fun to be here.
We have not been able to talk to anybody who actually did the physical work of the animation of this series. We talked about everything else possible, I think. We have now gone more episodes than there were animated series episodes, and we're only halfway through the series, so
amazing.
We are managing to find things to talk about, which kind of surprised us both, I think. And Adam is here as well, obviously.
Hello.
Hi, Adam.
Hello. I'm huffing in the fumes of the pine sol off the wood panel den.
So we're just gonna have kind of a free-form conversation today. You know, we do have some questions from the Babel Conference. That's our Facebook user group, and we'll ask those, and they might come up organically in between. But I think, first I'd want to ask what brought you to Filmation or animation in general. What's your background?
Well, before I forget his name, Mark Evanier is the guy who sent me over there. I mean, in the sense that he said, this is what's happening. They're making an animated Star Trek. And when Star Trek first came on the air, I was thrilled and delighted right from the start. And it was only a short while later, January of 1977, that I went into the Air Force for 4 years. Or 1967, sorry. And so almost all my viewing of Star Trek was down in a rec room or in my studio apartment after I got married. But it was all while I was still in the Air Force. I didn't get out until 1971. And perfect, I'm in the Air Force and it's Star Trek. What could be better?
They even see the Air Force in Star Trek at one point.
Exactly.
Tomorrow is yesterday, right?
That's right. That was so cool. Was he flying a Starfighter?
He was flying a Starfighter, yeah. Before we started recording, we were talking about my grandfather worked at Lockheed, and he was part of the Starfighter program, so that was cool.
Anyway, that was part of why I ended up on the animated version. So
you were a fan, definitely.
I was a huge fan. I built the models of the Enterprise and the Klingon ship. My wife and I are living in a studio apartment, but I decorated it with Star Trek stuff.
Priorities.
Yes,
yeah.
Of course.
That sounds familiar. I don't know. Could it be that my room is just filled with Star Trek stuff?
I can imagine all the people listening to a Star Trek podcast being like, I just don't relate to this.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, all my life, it's just been about drawing and painting. And it was all the only thing I was any good at. And I swear part of the business of becoming an artist is the fact that people, and when I say artist, I don't mean any other kind of artist, but someone who draws and paints. Although there are songwriters, there are sculptors and everything. But for me, this was the only thing that was really satisfying in it, and I would figure out ways of using it all through school for special projects and stuff, and teachers would have me go up and draw the schematic of a human cell with all the little things that are in it. And so that was my passport to success as a kid, and all the way through my life as it turned out. So the combination of loving monsters and spaceships from a very young age, I think the earliest dinosaur picture I saw was a lost continent when it was first shown on TV.
That's also another good Mystery Science
50s.
Theater
Yes,
version of it.
Hilarious. Climbing. And then also Space Patrol, which you guys must know.
Yes.
As a forerunner of Star Trek. It has a very similar structure. And I was just completely... Tom Corbett? Not so much. Space Patrol was great.
Let me ask you, Bob. You
Yeah.
mentioned monsters. Are you a fan of the Universal monsters?
Yeah, I am. In fact, Frankenstein and his bride, or the Frankenstein's monster and his bride, are all over my studio at home.
Nice.
I love the photographs and the movies themselves. Bride of Frankenstein is one of the best movies ever made, as far as I'm concerned.
Amazing.
And let's see, what else? So by the time they were working on the Star Trek animated series, I had spent a couple of my last years in the Air Force doing fan art for all kinds of magazines. And so when Mark, who I had collaborated with on a couple of comic book stories. There's a underground comic book called High Adventure that we worked on together. I think we only did one issue, but I have 2 stories in there and a wraparound painting for the cover.
Nice.
And it was tons of fun. And Mark and I were very close at the time. We would talk on the phone for long periods of time every week. And he knew all the stuff that was happening. So he's the one that pointed me in the right direction. I had been out of school for a few months. I had a son. I was married to my first wife. We lived in the valley, San Fernando Valley. And I was trying to make a go of being another Frank Frazetta or somebody.
Oh, yeah.
I
saw some of them, your early work, that looked like that.
Idolized him and Wally Wood and Al Williamson and those guys, and I wanted to somehow make that work for me. So after 5 semesters at Art Center, I decided to just concentrate totally on that. Well, of course, I wasn't making any money. Having a lot of fun.
Fanzines don't pay.
But all the money. Well, at this point, I was actually managing to do stuff for commercial publications, but not nearly enough. And my wife was working full time as a practical nurse, and all the money was coming from her. So when this opportunity came up, it was like, okay, I've always loved animation. I even, as a kid in the 7th grade, did a career report on animation. And I toured the Disney studios back when the animation building was full of animators. And my mom had a connection with Claude Coates' wife, And Claude Coates is a famous guy who was just outside the Disney Nine Old Men, but was a background painter and a designer. He was responsible for a large part of what Pirates of the Caribbean ride looks like. And he's also famous for going all the way back to Pinocchio and Snow White. You'll see his watercolor paintings in the Art of Disney books. And anyway, he took me around. I found out what that was like. So I had that going on in my head at the same time. I really did want to be my own guy. And when I was doing fanzines, one of them was the fantastic fanzine that Gary Groth, at the age of 15, published. And now he's Fantagraphics.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But back then, I drove him around. He had the first Washington, D.C. Comic-Con. I lived in Virginia at the time, was stationed at Andrews and then Bolling Air Force Base, was on the staff of Airman Magazine, which was a monthly that was in-house. It was a thing that they distributed to all of the air bases and stations and so forth. And I was their illustrator, although the big illustration every month was given to someone who had more chops and more experience than I did. But I did spot illustrations and stuff like that for that, and did paste up and worked with the art director and so on. So that was a good experience. Anyway, so to get back to the Star Trek animated series, I had this portfolio full of monsters and spaceships. So I took it to Filmation, just walked in the door, and
This is when it was in Reseda?
yeah.
Okay.
It's that building
Yeah.
that you've seen, if you know about Filmation history, with the marquee on top and so on. And Don Christensen was the art director. And so he interviewed me, and I showed him my stuff, and he said, "When can you start?"
Wow.
Which never happens today. I mean, you got to jump through so many hoops to
We'd
get
like
into
you
the
to
business.
meet this team, and then you meet that team. I'm like, I don't want to meet any more teams. Like,
It's impossible to get into the business now, even though more people are employed in it than have been in my history. But anyway, I started right away doing layout, and I had to learn on the job. I mean, I knew what I'd seen on the Disneyland program, and I knew what I'd read in books, but I didn't study animation at school. I studied illustration, but I could draw pretty well by that time, and so I was able to step right into what was the traditional way of laying out an animated film, which amounted to creating the background, drawing the key poses for the characters in their positions, indicating fielding and pans and all of the mechanicals that are needed to set up a scene from the storyboard. So that was my job. And because I had this experience of creating these creatures and spaceships, that's the other thing that they sent me to. And so I right from the beginning was designing new spacecraft and other hardware, and then also the basic ideas for the locations on different planets and inside new spacecraft, as well as designing aliens and some humans, a few humans, not too many.
One of the aliens I wanted to ask you about, and Aaron's got a big grin on his face because he knows exactly the one. It's from the Mud episode. It'd be the Ursinoids, the bear people. Can you give us a little background on the creation of the Ursinoids?
Well, the interesting thing about almost all of the things that I ended up designing was that there was a beginning that was visual. There was, of course, always a description in the script, but Hal Sutherland was the overall director for that show, and he also got credit for all the other shows that we did that year, which were 6, which is insane.
That is a lot.
Sherman Labby did a lot of the other storyboards, and he was my basic inspiration for how to do storyboards when I started doing that, because he had a very straightforward Hitchcockian way of creating continuity, and I admired that and felt that that was a good jumping off point. But anyway, with Hal's boards, even more, they were very primitive. They were very simply done in terms of the drawing and the design. And he had a gal that worked for him, Dawn Huntley, I think. She cleaned them up. And so he would indicate what the alien was based on the script description. And then depending on how interesting it was, I would either actually use that or often be guided by Don Christensen. Do this more like, you know. And it was Don Christensen as art director who believed that the real show started in layout. That, yeah, we have a script and, yeah, we have storyboard, but if we don't do good layouts, this thing's going to be terrible. So that was his, you know, and that's very chauvinistic. I mean, it's like, look out for the art department.
You're right.
Anyway, so that's how that worked. And some of the aliens, if you look at the storyboards, and it's been so many years now, it's hard for me to remember, but someone else was pointing out to me that, you know, I did these sort of artichoke-looking, tentacled plant people.
Yes.
And this fella pointed out to me that in the storyboard, they're just people in robes or something. A very simple looking thing. So because they were supposed to be plant creatures or vegetables,
Per
as
Gene
opposed to
Roddenberry,
animals,
from what we understand, it was
wanted
like, hey,
it to look
yeah.
more like something that was an animated vegetable.
As we joked at the time, you know, that went over so well on Lost in Space. Yeah. You know, it's like, yeah, let's make...
I would have looked that guy dead in the eye and just been like, you don't see everybody as artichoke people?
So that's usually how those things evolved.
Yeah.
There was always the kernel of the idea, for the most part, on the storyboard, but it was very simply done because the storyboards had to come out instantaneously, and between Hal and Dawn, they did the best they could to provide as many pages as possible, as quickly as possible. And so did Sherman. I mean, Sherman Labby did too.
We have a few questions from the Babel conference, and one of them was, what was your favorite alien that you designed for the show?
That's a good one. And it's especially good when you consider what I just said about how they evolved.
Yeah.
I was pretty happy with my anything that looked like a dragon, because I had very serious and personal ideas about what dragons or dinosaurs or anything reptilian and scary would look like. And so I think some of those things are the most successful. I think there's a dragon in that episode that's on the planet where Alice and...
Yes, that was...
We said it was the best part of the episode. We're like, there's a point where you can imagine anything, and it takes it till the very end to see a dragon, like something
dragon.
interesting. Yeah, it was great. We love that.
Yeah.
And also that you'll
Once
see
Upon a
a
Planet.
design relationship between that dragon and the undersea sea serpent, which I also did. That ended up on a book cover. I was very happy about that.
And I think it also ended up, at least in
I'll pull up the comic book, because when we did that episode just the other week, I've been reading recently from the 90s, DC Comics put out a series of Next Generation comics, and I'll pull it up, but you guys keep talking while I find this, but it looked very redolent of the original sea serpent that you had designed for that episode.
Oh, that's cool.
you can-
That does, well, it's red. Which the one was, but that's cool. That's cool. That's actually that's very impressive.
Yeah, so we'll put this in the show notes. This is Star Trek: The Next Generation, published by DC Comics, September '91. This is issue 23, and you got Deanna Troi on the cover, swimming around with a big old orange
Sea
red
serpent.
sea serpent.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is on the bottom right. You got a nice little classic Delta 1991, the 25th anniversary. There you go.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
That's
So,
cool.
Yeah, no, so we enjoyed the serpents quite a bit.
And I think there's pterodactyls that I did, or something that looks a lot like pterodactyls.
would that be in the same episode with the Philosians, the plant? They're the plant
probably,
bat. Yeah,
probably. And those ones, yeah, those were pretty wacky.
yeah.
I
with
enjoyed
the little spring.
That's
kinda
right.
feet or
Those I
whatever.
enjoyed those a lot. There's that bird creature. I think I did a pretty good job
Oh,
on that.
a Leakon or
It's a-
Olmec or whatever the
I can't remember the name, but
The
it was
Kukulkan?
no.
No. Yeah, but I did do Kukulkan.
Yeah, awesome.
The one that was in the episode where they go back in time to Vulcan,
Yes,
and then
yes.
was used later. It seemed like in the Jihad.
Yes,
Were
the
they
Jihad
were
is
they
where
supposed to be
I'm
the same
remembering it.
species?
It is.
Because we've had that discussion.
If I remember correctly, I had designed it for the first show,
Right.
And then I think that it was Hal Sutherland that chose to use it in the second show.
Oh, okay.
Because they were looking for ways to use same as apart from the stock system.
Right.
They wanted to use things that had already been created for the show. Sometimes I think they even painted them differently just so
Yeah.
that they wouldn't look like exactly the same thing.
There was a little bit of a difference between the two, but not a whole lot. So-
Because if they had, especially if they had done any appreciable amount of animation on it, then they'd want to use that again.
Right.
But yeah, no, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed making the rock creatures for. But the animators hated me because they had so many facets. It was
Yeah,
really hard to track. But I didn't think they looked good with less.
Yeah.
And
They wouldn't look like rock.
And I do have to give a nod to one of my favorite animation things in the entire history of animation, and that's the Rite of Spring sequence from Fantasia.
Amazing.
And those dinosaurs are what I was mentally referencing when I designed a lot of the things for Filmation, because especially at that point in my career, I felt like those were the best designed dinosaurs I'd ever seen. And I really wanted to, and you will see some little signature bits here and there if you look carefully at the designs. You'll see that, oh yeah, he used that thing from the Tyrannosaurus in Fantasia for this creature.
Okay.
And so there were design ideas that I felt
I have to go back
could
and watch
be
that now.
applied there.
I think everyone should go back and watch Fantasia.
Yeah, right.
We were talking before we on the other side of the wood panel den, as they say.
The other side of the wood panel den.
Before the show, we were talking about the classic Fleischer Brothers Superman cartoons and Fantasia. These things age like fine wine. This is just classic
really
animation.
And nobody does that kind of thing anymore. And it's so almost a lot when you talk about lost arts. There's a lost art, and part of it is because of the mentality of the people who were doing it at the time. Their whole approach to storytelling and design and all the other elements that come together to make those animated sequences. The people don't think that way anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's still a delight to go back and enjoy those things.
And it's interesting to hear different age group people talk about Filmation shows, because there's a varying opinion on quality or what they get out of it. So it's sort of, I've always enjoyed it, and then you got people who are just like, wow, this is horrible, and you're just like, how do you, what?
Especially us that worked on it.
Yeah.
I have a friend, Tom Minton, who's a writer and a producer and has done all kinds of stuff, but he was a close friend back in the Filmation days. He literally burned a script in the hallway because of his disgust.
Wow.
And I think it was a Tom and Jerry script or something like that. It wasn't Star Trek or Tarzan or some of the more respected shows
Brady Kids.
that we did. Oh boy, yeah. Brady Kids was actually before my time.
Ah.
They had done that already.
Yeah, I think because it came out the same year, though, right, as Star Trek?
I think perhaps.
Or maybe the year before.
Well, then maybe it was concurrent with
Yeah.
my first job. But yeah, fascinating.
So, well, it's kind of interesting. You look at the quality of Star Trek, though, compared to things like, the Brady Kids or Lassie's Rescue Rangers or whatever there is,
You leave the Rescue
I know.
Rangers out of this.
Emergency +4.
And one of the most important artists on Lassie was George Wheeler. George Wheeler it was killing him that he wasn't being able to work on Star Trek.
Oh.
And he is, if you look him up, he was a Disney artist to begin with. He worked on rotoscoping Cinderella, Dancing with the Prince, and stuff like that. He was a superior talent. But something, if you haven't seen, you should look up is the newspaper panel that Disney did called True Life Adventures.
Okay.
And it's not a consecutive strip. It's a panel that highlights a different animal each time. And he did it for years. And it was all done before he was at Filmation. And, he was, at that point, he was such an amazing artist. And because Lassie's Rescue Rangers had all these animals in it, he was the perfect guy to be doing that stuff. But he really wanted to do Star Trek. And it was so sad that he didn't get a chance.
Well, luckily, there was a little bit of Lassie's Rescue Rangers in one of our planets is missing. When they were talking about Earth, they were like, then you see Lassie run by. And why they weren't showing pictures of the planet that it was going to eat, we didn't quite get. But, I don't think people would get that.
That's great.
So, yeah, no, that was pretty good. So, so we talked about the creatures. What are your favorite ships? Because I know we were talking beforehand that Mike Okuda loves the robot grain ship. That's one of his favorite ships. And
well, here's the ship story, and this is also the Gene Roddenberry story.
Okay.
Although I did actually finally get to meet him at the wrap party at Lou Scheimer's house, the house that Archie built, he called it. And it was one of those huge glass houses up in the hills with rivers running through it and everything. Roddenberry was very involved with the first episode, Beyond the Farthest Star, right?
Yeah.
And for that episode, we needed to come up with the derelict spaceship. And he
Which
was
I love.
determined that it wouldn't look like anything you'd seen before. And as a result, as the brand new guy on the crew who had spaceships and stuff in his portfolio, I got the job of coming up with that ship. I literally did 100 designs before he accepted the watermelon ship.
That's 65 more than we had actually been told. We heard 35.
No,
so it's like,
it was
wow.
100. And some of them ended up being that.
In the time trap.
That one that's on the screen.
Oh, the Bonaventure.
The Bonaventure was one of the ships. Because I started out just doing Star Trek ships with nacelles and so forth. And, no, that's not it at all. And so, and I didn't talk to him personally. I was never, it was all through
memos,
Lou and Don Christensen, and so he kept pushing it. I kept drawing things that were familiar to the Star Trek universe as I understood it, and he didn't want any of that. But because we had to go through channels, and it was like the telephone game. You never, I didn't ever get to what he was thinking.
Like one word, organic.
If
that would have helped it. I mean,
yeah. And there's the insect thing and the fact that we did the, what were they, hexagons or?
Yeah. Or,
yeah,
I think they're hexagons. Like bees.
But,
wow, the Bonaventure was first designed for the first episode.
The derelict ship.
That is
because I had no idea
crazy.
that the derelict ship wasn't supposed to be a Federation ship or something like that when I was first. Because I don't even think the script was finished at that point. I think it was like I was given the job of coming up with a derelict ship and not much more. And so that's as a result why we had all these different ones. And so you know the episode, and I can't remember the name of it, with the Sargasso of space, with all of the drifting spaceships.
Oh, Time Trap.
That's why all of those ships are so intricately drawn and carefully worked out. They never would have been otherwise. It's because I had them all in a file, and all I had to do was Xerox them to different sizes and paste them up along the pan. So all of those ships that are in that Sargasso of space are ones that were designed right at the head of the series for the derelict ship.
I had heard about that. We thought it was really interesting because the live action series did the same thing with test models, and the current show that's going to be coming out, Star Trek Discovery, is based off of the Ralph McQuarrie, Ken Adam design for Planet of the Titans.
Oh,
and they did a couple test models, and those models have ended up in the show. They were in like space dock in Star Trek 3, I think it was, and when they were in a junkyard of ships, they on Next Generation, it was there too. So they would reuse old models or models that they blew up and they kept the saucer for, and it's just floating there. So, or the Battle of Wolf 359. So I think it was really interesting that actually happened in the animated series as well.
yes, yeah, it did.
That's cool.
So so those were my brushes with greatness. But we were talking earlier about why Star Trek was better than some other Filmation projects. The very first person I lay the blame on is Dorothy. She was so devoted to the series and to getting the talent to write the shows, and it makes all the difference in the world. Now, I was a big fan, so brand new there. I didn't know how I was supposed to behave, so I just acted real geeky and enthusiastic, and I think some of that rubbed off on the people who weren't all that thrilled. Now, there was another fellow there who has since passed away, George Good, who had just come from Texas, and he had been in art school there, and he worked on the show too, and he had the same kind of enthusiasm for the show. So he did some of the design work for the planet surfaces and stuff like that, and he was a layout guy.
Yeah, those backgrounds are amazing. You look at them and it's just
there was
wow.
a fella named Paul Zander, spelled with an X, who was primarily responsible for those lovely backgrounds that had especially interesting textures and nice bounce light on the shadow side and stuff like that. And he was like the key guy. And I believe he's the one that did the rendered cells of the Enterprise that are pulled through scene with maybe the nacelles animating or what have you.
Yes, literally pulled through.
Yeah.
In the Blu-ray, do you have the Blu-ray version of the?
I do.
You can see a lot more detail and fingerprints
Too
and
much.
things like that.
Too much.
I think it's great. Like I want to see the smudge. I want to see that fingerprint. I want to see that hair. I think Blu-ray is amazing.
Handmade.
Yeah.
That's what's cool.
proves
Like,
it.
I think people, I always see, because I'm a film geek too, people complain about like seeing too much film grain from old films, and I was like, I think it's great that you can see that level of detail, and it makes it so much more interesting and more tactile in a digital age.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I think some of the feedback that people give about animation from the 70s is based on computer animation today.
Sure.
It's like it will never look like that. It can't be like that. And there isn't the same appreciation for, they didn't, not that computer animation's easy, but that they didn't set something here, have a track, set something there, and then walk away and let it render.
That's
They
right.
literally have to do every frame by hand. So well, within reason. But yeah, you can have... I kind of said that Filmation seems to have invented sort of like the macro for animation. Like they would have these sets, of somebody running or whatever, and they would reuse that and change things out. So it was sort of like they had a built-in action on the computer that you could push a button and it does that one thing. So
Yeah.
kind of feels like that. But yeah, the film grain, just the brush strokes that you can see in places, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of like kind of this, what was the process of like say from you get a script or however that worked to, we see it on the air. What?
Right. What was wonderful about working there, and I did from 73 to 80, is that it was boot camp for animation. It really taught you the process, since I had no previous experience other than what I said. And so I got to see, and the only thing that wasn't done there in the building was processing the film, but all the other steps were there. And it starts with the script, and then the storyboard, and then doing the layouts, and then those go to animation. After there are layout assistants who clean up the key drawings.
Okay.
And often those key drawings are what are used because, as you well know, time and time again, Spock's head will be there, and the only thing moving is his eyebrow and his eyes blinking or looking left and right, and his mouth moving. And
or his hand in front of his mouth, so he doesn't have to even move his mouth.
Precisely, the space angel effect.
Well, when I first found out that, like, why Yogi Bear and Snagglepuss all wear bow ties but no clothes, just so they can keep the head, like move certain parts of the body. I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. So it's like, everyone's got their own little techniques. I love that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
everything in Hanna-Barbera had a tie or a bow or something.
Cuffs, little hand cut, like not hand collars.
Collars, yeah.
But they were great at doing shortcuts, which had already been pretty much figured out by the guys at UPA when they were doing Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing and those kinds of things. And, of course, Disney had sussed that out for things as well, like Toot Whistle, Plunk and Boom. And so we were using all of those things to keep the costs down. And
it was about $75,000 an episode or something. They said
I don't know. I mean, that sounds reasonable. I have no idea. I know that Lou Scheimer repeatedly said that he didn't make money on the first run through. That it had to be seen again and again in order for them to start realizing against their.
It seemed to have run
outlay
through most of the 70s, so I'm assuming that they did get some of that money back.
Oh yeah, and some shows did get repeated a lot, and other shows not so much. So, that was the thinking, but he still was very serious about keeping the costs down. And so from there, it went to animation, and like I said, they would keep the keys if they could and just animate in between them. And then assistant animators would do the in-betweens, and then there were cleanup people who cleaned all of that up. And the layouts would go to the background department where they were painted. The directors would do the timing sheets, which accounted for every movement of everything in the scene, line by or frame by frame. And those timing sheets with the completed artwork would go to camera. We had 4 cameras, and they'd get shot there. It would go out to Technicolor to get processed. It would come back. They'd edit it, which didn't require a lot because most of it was already edited through what the storyboards told you about the scene and layout and the exposure sheets.
Right.
And once it was edited, they would... and I completely forgot about recording the actors.
Yeah, I was going to ask you when that came in the process.
Which was done immediately after the script was written.
Okay.
And once the storyboards were done, they would slug the storyboards, which means adding between the lines of dialogue the amount of time that was needed to do whatever else was going to happen without dialogue over it, which in most filmation projects was just a small amount of the screen time because at that time, and even now, the radio show idea of what a TV episode should be like is adhered to. So when people stop talking, most TV executives think that the audience is going to the kitchen, so they don't want to lose them.
It's like if you're watching X-Files, you actually have to watch X-Files because they will stop talking in places or something like that, and you're just like, okay, I have no idea what just happened.
And there are other shows now that subscribe to that point of view, and very effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, just wonderful stuff. But back then, and especially kids shows, they wanted to keep talking. So that happened. Even shows that had slapstick in them, they kept talking through the action.
Which makes you wonder if they didn't talk as much, if maybe the scripts might have been somewhat smarter.
Well, there is that. But there's also the fact that the scripts were so short. And you know, how much had to get on screen to tell the story. So,
but I think the Star Trek scripts for the animated series seem to really excel at that. I think for 22 minutes, you got a good, decent, almost original series type story in most cases.
Absolutely, and many of them were sequels, like More Tribbles, More Troubles. But
well, I know. Just jumping off that point, something Aaron was asking, jumping off that point, something that someone in the Babel conference asked about, and Aaron was curious about, was the presence of the color pink in a lot of these episodes and the Tribbles, and we know you had some opinions about this.
Yeah, I think we'll save that for part 2. A little bit of a cliffhanger. And it's not quite the story about the color pink that you think it's going to be. And if you want to see the show we've been talking about in all its glory, the standalone TAS Blu-ray is the way to go. And you may remember back in December we had a contest that ran until the end of January to win a copy of that Blu-ray, thanks to Patreon patron Ju Kim. Today we're putting all of the names into the computer and randomly picking a winner.
Working.
And the winner is Justin Ozer.
Verified.
Yeah, okay. Justin, we'll be sending out your prize as soon as we get your address, so just drop us a line in the Babel conference and we'll get it right out to you. And thanks to everyone for participating, and thanks for all the kind words and reviews. This really is a labor of love, and I hope that shows. But sending a TAS Blu-ray to Justin isn't the only thing we've been doing at Trek FM this week. Here's a listen to some of the things you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm. To the journey!
The origin of the Voth was that the lizard babies went back in time.
And then they evolved into
Yes.
the Voth.
Yes.
So Captain Janeway is the ancestor of their entire race? Is that what you're
Tom
saying?
and Janeway are the ancestors of the entire Voth race.
Literary Treks.
It never stops. You never really have a moment to say, like, yay, good job. It's like, literally, okay, on to the next thing. You're probably already late on the next 3 things that you're supposed to be doing.
Melodic Treks.
You know, when you're used to recording either at Abbey Road or Sony Studios in Hollywood, it's hard to go to another room that doesn't have that same kind of sound, and also the depth of players is not just not as deep as it is here in London, for instance,
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out the shows and get in on the daily Trek Talk. You can find them in iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, and the Windows Podcast Directory for Xbox and Zune. You can visit our website at Trek.fm and view our podcast directory and stream all of our shows right from the website. We'd also like to invite you to leave us a review and ratings in iTunes. Not only does it help us know how we're doing, it also helps other people find the show. Before we go, I'd like to thank our Patreon patrons, Eric Extreme and Ju Kim. Thank you so much for your support. And if you want to become an associate producer of a Trek FM show, all you need to do is become a patron of the network at the $25 or more level. Go to patreon.com/TrekFM and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, that's all for today from the Trek FM Wood Panel Den. So come back next week for part 2 of our interview with Bob Kline. Not only will you get the lowdown on the color pink, you'll also find out why there's a second turbolift on the bridge. Oh, and remember, there is an animated series.